Welcome to the Decentralized Opportunity podcast. We have a weekly podcast discussing innovative ideas in business and technology from unconventional and often overlooked sources. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, and I'm here with my other host,
Wyatt Carson. Hello.
Hello. How's your week been?
Hectic. How are you? Lots of travel and crazy business stuff, but you?
Not as much travel, but crazy business stuff. But I'm glad we're recording a day behind. We had some personal stuff come up yesterday when we normally do our recordings. So I'm really excited to get to talk with you and record this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the flexibility. And for whoever listens, we appreciate you. Absolutely. So lots of good stuff's happening. For me, this last week, I spent my weekend doing a Scrum Master course. So I'm getting my certified Scrum Master, my Scrum Master certification. That's the one. So I've spent my weekend in a training and lots of good stuff to come out of that. But how about you? What's something interesting you did this week? This weekend was mostly geared around family, and Roman is really close to walking. He actually got like 10 steps today. He's just growing up too fast. So part of my week has just been realizing how quickly time passes us by. And no matter how much you want to savor a moment, it's a fleeting thing as, the next thing that happens. Absolutely. It's adorable. Well, if you check my pedometer this weekend, I got about 10 steps myself, but that's awesome.
Yeah, the weather's been good, so I've been trying to get outside, trying to be more productive, but also been reading a lot, and we have lots of exciting things. You want to talk about your Scrum Master certification, and that kind of sparked a book that I had read recently that goes in conjunction with that. So let's kick it off. Tell us first of all, what is Scrum?
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone who's out there listening, if you happen to be a Scrum Master, please don't hate me. I'm taking the practice test like a bajillion times so that I can actually take the real test. But yeah, so Scrum it's an empirical process framework for building complex things in a complex environment, and that is definition according to the Scrum Master Bible or whatever the document is. So what that means is Scrum, it's not a process per se. It's not a methodology. It's a framework. It's a box that you work within when you're in a complex environment with lots of different things that can go wrong, and you need to build a complex product, usually geared towards software, which I'll get to that in a second. But more importantly, what it does is it sets things up to be really flexible. And it breaks up giant, massive work. If you want to build a brand new software product, if you wanted to build Microsoft Word, for example, how would you go about doing that? It seems like a monstrous task. If you went with formal project management, you would sit in a bunch of rooms with a bunch of high-level execs, and you would map out and plan out, years worth of work potentially, and who would work on it, and at what time it's due, and what it needs to look like, and that's fantastic. But that's traditional project management. The problem with traditional project management in complex projects is that, things change. And that's where Agile comes in. If you're familiar with other process improvement methodologies, the theory behind Agile is exactly what it says. It's supposed to be flexible because things change, people change, priorities, and even requirements change regularly. So if you build an entire product in a vacuum at the beginning of it, what is the likelihood you're going to get that exact same thing a year later with all the developers? Mm-hmm. You plan it, you hand it over, it's not going to work that way, right?
Yeah, we talked about this in our previous podcast, the difference between being like project-based versus product-based and things like that. Bingo. Can you tell me what the difference is between being Agile and Scrum?
To my knowledge, once again, Agile people and Scrum people out there, don't beat me up. Scrum is Agile. Now, Agile can expand a little bit further. It's like all of them are project management, but formal project management is very strict. Agile and Scrum similar things are set up to be flexible and use shorter things called sprints. And by a sprint, it's usually 2 to 4 weeks of work geared towards producing a functional piece of the product. Whatever your grand vision for the product is, your goal is to just create one functional piece. It could be the login button of a new website. That's your sprint. Make that work. And at the end of that sprint, you have a functional piece of your product. Instead of waiting with formal project management till the very end and hopefully everything comes together, you build it piece by piece by piece according to your requirements you set forth. And so Agile and Scrum are they're brother and sister is the way I look at it. And
so it's kind of like a Scrum. It's kind of like a square and a rectangle, where a square is always a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't always a square.
Ah, yeah, that's beautiful. I love how you said that. That's exactly it. So Scrum is named after the rugby scrum. If you're familiar with rugby, you've ever played it or you've ever seen it. The scrum is when everyone gets together in a big huddle and they fight each other over the ball. The purpose behind that is Scrum is it can be fast and dirty and gritty, but at the end, someone has the ball or the product or a piece of the product, and that's where it all kind of comes together. And that's why I've been skeptical of Scrum for a very long time. I'm not a software developer, and Scrum always came to me as a software development tool. It's project management for software developers. Well, that's not me, so I never gave it much thought. But as I was going through this course, I kept asking, I think I annoyed my instructor a little bit because I kept saying, give me examples of how Scrum can be used without software, because everything is software. Scrum and software go hand in hand. You look at most software companies and they know what Scrum is, and most of them operate Scrum. But I kept thinking, surely this has to have other applications besides producing software. How could I, a non-software developer, a non-techie person, utilize Scrum or Agile in something else? And they gave me some great examples, and at the end of the day, the formal definition of creating a complex product or a complex project under complex circumstances can fit in with so many things. Mm-hmm. And so I got to thinking about this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it fit together with me in my head.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's table that for just a second, and I'm going to introduce, my tangential thing to go along with what you were saying. So I've been fortunate to know quite a few Scrum Masters in the last few years, and one who was a Scrum Master manager. So he actually oversaw a large group of Scrum Masters for an enterprise, and he introduced me to this book called The Outward Mindset. And it's required reading for basically everyone who joins any of the teams, not just the Scrum Masters themselves, but everyone who participates. And what he looks for in Scrum Masters is really exemplified in what this book talks about. So the biggest thing with it is so many times, the overarching concept is this. Most of the time we look inward. What is it in it for me? What you need to do is shift the perception of expectations from yourself outward and actually think about, consider, and understand what is in it for others, essentially. And the things that you're looking for specifically is you're trying to understand the needs, objections, and challenges of others. And really by being genuine and listening and discovering, putting yourselves in their shoes in many ways, you're able to solve problems so much better, collaborate more, and come to solutions that you can never understand at the beginning. And there's a really good quote I want to kind of share real fast with you. It says, real helpfulness, or I guess, first of all, the main perspective is that if I was to give my heart to blank, this person, what would it occur to me to do? So real helpfulness cannot be made into a formula. To be outward doesn't mean that people should adopt this or that prescribed behavior. Rather, it means that when people see needs, challenges, desires, and humanity of others, the most effective way to adjust their efforts occur to them in the moment. When they see others as people, they respond in human and helpful ways. So want to kind of bounce that in with your learning.
Okay, I like that. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely have to check out this book. At the end of the day, and it fits similar to what we talked about in a past podcast, is that customer is king, and that's not saying the customer is always right. You know, that cliche thing you hear in retail. It's not about the customer being right. It's about what does the customer want? And if you don't consider that outside source, you do what you want, what you envision, what you think is awesome, and do not consider other outside sources like that, you're not going to produce anything anyone wants to buy. You might want to buy it, but that doesn't make you a business. That makes it a hobby and a project you made. It doesn't make a business, doesn't make a product, because you can't sell it. No one wants that. You didn't make something people want because you didn't consider other people. You only considered yourself. And you know, it sounds a little blunt and hurtful, but you kind of considered your own selfish desires. That's a project. That's a hobby. That's not a product to be sold to a customer base.
Yeah, and what you were saying too, you need to also understand who is your customer, because many times you could be working for a company and you don't necessarily interact with customer themselves, but let's say you're a Scrum Master. In many ways, your customer is the people within the team, and you owe loyalty to the people within the team. So you are listening to their needs, their objectives, their challenges, and helping them overcome that so they can focus on their customer, which may actually be the customer of the business.
Bingo. So there's a Scrum team consists of three types of people. Is the product owner, the Scrum Master, and then the developers. Now, usually there's one product owner and one Scrum Master, and then there could be up to 8, 9, 10 developers, depending on the sprints and the backlog and all that other buzzword stuff that if you're not familiar with Scrum probably doesn't make sense. But you're absolutely right. As a Scrum Master or as a developer on a Scrum team, you owe allegiance to the product owner, because that product owner, what they do is not only are they responsible for the product, they own the relationship with the customer. So a product owner, they're not coming to you with what they want. They're coming to you, the Scrum Master and the developers, with what does the customer want. We write user stories and create backlog items. A backlog is essentially a giant list of features and functions that you want in said software or product. And it could be hundreds, it could be thousands if it's a massive product. But the job of the product owner is to interpret the customer's wants and needs and deliver that down to the Scrum Master and developers in bite-sized chunks, the backlog items, and break those up into those sprints that I was talking about. You don't produce the entire product quickly. You produce one function. Hey, our customer research, the voice of the customer that we went out and got, said that they really like it when you click on this button and it takes you to this screen and it auto loads your information that you already input. Why wouldn't you like that? That sounds fantastic. So that becomes a backlog item, and the Scrum Master ensures that works, and the developers create that piece of the product. So absolutely, you're right. The Scrum Master and developers, ultimately, they are responsible for the end product of what the client wants or the customer wants, but that product owner is kind of, they hold that relationship, and they make the decision, is this in my customer's best interest or not? Absolutely.
Yeah. I really like the idea of whether you're focusing on the macro or the micro, holding the same steps and purpose and vision to those things. So many times we lose steps, especially when we're thinking inward, because you're only thinking about yourself and you haven't really dug deep enough to understand the situation in full. And you just make a lot of assumptions due to prior biases or just ignorance in general. So it leads to a lot of frustration for both you as well as whoever you're interacting with. Yeah. When you're outward focused, and what I like here with what you're saying about Scrum is you can have one person who's focused on, the next layer in the tree ring or something like that wholeheartedly. And then you can have someone who focuses on the layer out. And then the whole thing, you're still one unit that is focusing on the main focus of the customer and what's best for the product.
Yeah, absolutely. It's iterative. You don't build a product overnight that customers love. You build upon it, and you add features, and you add functionality, and you get feedback, and you reach out to the customer and say, hey, do you like this? No? Cool, we'll get rid of it. Or, oh, you would like to see this? Let's add it in. You iterate until you have a fully functioning product that the customer loves, that you're comfortable with, and that works and is marketable. Honestly, that's the goal.
Yeah. You mentioned stories. What are those?
Stories. So there's One thing that admittedly confused me during my training, but I think I've got it down. If not, someone please comment and let me know. So stories can be giant chunks. It says something like, I am a 36-year-old male in Omaha, Nebraska. I would like my software to be able to automatically drag in my email and sort based off of what I deem as important. Okay, what does that mean? And obviously, I made that up. I don't want anyone to dig through my email and post it for me. But that is a story. The story is, this is the customer. This is what the customer looks like. This is what the customer wants. And this is how the customer is going to use it. And that story is interpreted by the product owner and the developers to really not just create exactly what the story says, but interpret it and decide what exactly is the customer looking for. They want something that will automatically pull email and organize it and get rid of junk mail. So maybe it's not exactly what the customer said based off of this story, this 36-year-old imaginary guy in Omaha, Nebraska. But what are they actually trying to get at? What is the root of their problem that they're trying to solve with your product? And that's the story. The story puts a human being behind it. It's a fake human being, but it allows the developers to use their imagination and picture this 36-year-old guy in Omaha who has this problem with too much junk mail. How else can we solve that? That's a story. A story brings it down to a human level. It's not just a software code. It's something a human being will actually use, and they want it to work right. That's what a story is.
Okay. So to put it in the context of this podcast, I got another question for you. Let's say that someone is in a small town, this area here, and they are, say, hey, this actually sounds interesting. I would like to learn it. If they do learn these concepts and things like that, what opportunities could be open for them?
Oh, that's a great question. So that's one of the first things I did is I went and Googled like average salary for a Scrum Master. I will not become a Scrum Master. This is an additional skill set for me that I've been kind of curious about, and it was offered, and I took the opportunity. Scrum Masters are extremely valuable. In today's tech-heavy world, that tech is created by someone. It's created by a company. It's created by a development team. And more often than not, that development team's running Scrum. It's that widespread. It's all over the world, which means so many people are creating things. They need someone who can herd the cats, so to speak, who can translate those business requirements and who can ensure that it's within those time boxes and it's done at the right time and the product owner is happy, which means the customers are happy. That's the value of a Scrum Master. Herding cats, that's the best way I can describe it. They make sure the developers are on time. They make sure that they know what they're doing, what they're working on, and that they're achieving what the definition of done is. And that definition of done, I want to hit on that because that's probably one of the most fantastic concepts I learned during this entire training. The definition of done is created by the Scrum team or the business, if the business has a standard, but if not, the Scrum team develops what they think is done. Now, that sounds a little scary. You're going to leave a bunch of developers to determine what done is for a product? No, not for the product. That's not their responsibility. They don't have the authority to say, this product's done. What they can say is this sprint is done. That sprint, which has a couple of those backlog items, I want the login button to take me to this screen. That's a backlog item. A developer can do that pretty simply. I assume I'm not a developer. But the definition of done is set forth at the very beginning during the sprint planning session. They plan what we're going to work on, what backlog items we're going to fit into this little section of time, usually 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks. And they say, when this login button takes us to this screen and autofills this person's information, this sprint is done, or this backlog item is done. That is the definition of done. The Scrum team, the Scrum Master, the product owner, they're not telling developers how to do their job. I don't know how to code. Product owners probably don't know how to code. I'm sure there are some, but there's probably plenty out there who have no idea how to code and develop software. So it's not a matter of telling them how to do their job. Hey, insert this code so it works. That's not how it works. You give the developers the autonomy. Here's the user story. Here's that fake person from Omaha, Nebraska who wants XYZ. Here is the functionality they're specifically seeking. And here's the definition of done. Once you get to this definition of done, bam, you're done. That backlog item is marked off the list, and you move on to the next one. I love the concept of definition of done versus good enough or someone else's definition. It's agreed upon by the team. It's not my opinion as a Scrum Master that this is good. What do I know? It's agreed upon by the team that, yes, this meets our requirements. It meets the customer requirements. We can check it off and move on to the next item.
Yeah. And I would see so many times, I deal with this a lot, where you just keep looping over the same thing and you never actually move on to the next problem.
Absolutely. And that's what this is here to avoid. You agree what done is very early in the process. So you don't have to go back and fight over it and say, well, we could have added this. We could have done. No, you reach the requirement, move on. Because another important factor of Scrum is it's time boxed. And what that means, a time box is whatever activity you're working on can only take so long. You can do it shorter, and that's great. Cool. Good for you. But you cannot go over a certain time limit. This has to be done by this day at this time. That's a time box. And what that also does is it forces people to be okay with iteration. We could play around and fix and manipulate things all day for years and years and years and never actually create a product because it's not good enough. We decide this means done. Let's move on. Of course, you can go back and review it. And there is sprint reviews and product owner reviews and stakeholder reviews who say, oh, that's not really what I was thinking. Go back to it. And that's fine. That happens. But for the development team, they have to move because they may have 1,000 backlog items. And if you spend your time on one backlog item thinking, oh, we could have done this, let's go back, and you'll never get the project done. This forces you to get to an endpoint. And of course, you'll iterate and change things, but this will force you to at least get a product on the table. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also think, just going back to someone who'd be interested in learning this stuff to find an opportunity. One, like you said, you provide a lot of value. So there's a lot of companies out there that would need that. So you'd have
Absolutely.
Not only the opportunity to move and join a company, but so many development teams now are fully remote. So many software companies are fully remote. So you can, live in a rural place and actually lead these teams who are all across the country or some offshore, and do your job at 100% effectively.
Completely. The opportunities are not only are there a ton of opportunities, it's growing. It's getting more and more popular because the world is moving to software. We already are, and it's only going to get more, which means there's going to be more developers, which means there's going to be more development teams, more product owners, more Scrum Masters. It's only getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're absolutely right. It's completely remote. You don't have to be in the same room as a bunch of developers all working together physically for this to work. And more importantly, and this is kind of why I hem and hawed about taking this course and getting the certification for years, honestly, is I've never been a techie person. I've never written a piece of code in my life. I played around with VBA on Excel a lot. I'm pretty good at Excel, but that's where my coding ends. That's not the skill set they're looking for in a Scrum Master. It helps. I'm sure there's a lot of benefit to being a developer who moves into a Scrum Master role. But if you're not a particularly technology-focused individual, maybe you're just a project person or a critical thinker or someone who's really good at organizing teams and people and getting them moving along in a path, Scrum Master might be for you. I always thought, what do I know about development and coding? I could never do Scrum Master. That's not it. It's about herding cats. And nothing against you developers out there. You're not all cats, I understand. But you have to understand that people need direction and they need to know when enough is enough and we have to move on. And that's the role of the Scrum Master.
So let's say that you are in starting up a business, you own a business, you're, an operator in a business that is not technology. You were saying, what are some of these other use cases? So what did you kind of come up with there?
Yeah. At the end of the day, if you are producing something that you wish to be sold to a customer, the principles of Scrum fit in with anything. If you're making a t-shirt business, it doesn't matter. If you're making Microsoft Word versus a t-shirt, the same thing applies. These principles that you follow for basic Scrum can be attributed to anything. And let me run through the basic principles of Scrum real quick. It'll make a lot more sense. So the first thing about Scrum is it's an empirical process. And what that means is it runs off of data and facts. And I love this personally. For years and years and years, I've quoted this to people. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but no one's entitled to their own facts. And Scrum doesn't allow room for opinions and egos. It's facts. The customer needs this to work. If you press log in, you should be able to log in. End of story. I keep going to the login because it's a simple explanation. but empirical. Scrum is empirical. It doesn't run off the product owner's wants and needs and desires or what they think would be cool. It's what the customer wants and whether it works or not. It's empirical. The next one's self-organization. Developers in a Scrum team are giving a lot of leeway to interpret and do their job and use their skill set that they've practiced and they went to school and they have all this career experience. Instead of being micromanaged, they say, hey, I want this login button to work. This is my definition done. Go do it. I don't care how you do it, give or take. For the most part, they are given the autonomy to organize themselves and make sure, hey, you have 2 weeks to accomplish this goal. Go. And I'll check back in, make sure you're okay. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll see if you're good to go. The self-autonomy, self-organization is really cool. Micromanagement never works, especially in these complex development teams.
Yeah, I would see where so many businesses, they want to kind of control everything, especially small businesses with owners where this is their livelihood, their babies, their dream.
Yeah.
They tend to micromanage their employees. And when you can kind of separate yourself a little bit more, give ownership and autonomy to an employee and let them come up with their own solutions to succeed that you maybe wouldn't have come up with on your own.
Absolutely.
But still be there as a resource for them if they need you. I think, man, that's super powerful.
We talk about this in decentralized opportunities, and it's the same in a small microcosm of a business. People have abilities and skill sets that other people don't recognize because they don't give them the opportunity or the tools to express their talent. And it's the exact same thing. In a formal project management setting, someone would be over their shoulder the entire time following a Gantt chart and other crazy project management things. I'm very familiar with project management. I'm kind of making fun of myself on this one. It's very micromanagey, and it just is. Scrum says, we need this at the end of 2 weeks. Go do it. And I love that concept. It gives, and you get so much more perspective. The guy who's been developing code for 15 years probably knows how to do it better than me or a product owner who, kind of moved up through the company, right? Utilizing that talent and not wasting the talent is really a cool opportunity.
Yeah. And to take us back to the outward mindset, I have another quote I wrote down that's very applicable to that. It says, quote, "People don't like being seen and treated as objects. Objects, in quotations, do what you want them to do. But when you try to control or push people, they often resist. They might be resisting the idea of being, quote, a thing." That's the end of the quote. So many times you might get a result once sometimes, but if you push too hard or you ask somebody to do things there, you're going to, one, cause a lot of friction and pushback and headaches that you might not have seen before, which having multiple employees previously in my life is for sure a real thing. But if you can give them, again, agency and ownership and let them feel like they're a part of the process because they truly are a part of the process and they truly have value and you can utilize all of their talents, man, that's going to take you to another level entirely.
Absolutely. I think it's really dangerous for people to fall in the trap of they have all the answers. It's not possible. So the last few core pieces of Scrum is collaboration. Scrum comes from the daily Scrum. This is a daily, Monday through Friday, every morning, no longer than 15 minutes. That's a time box. It can't be more than 15 minutes, where the development team gets together to say, this is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I'm working on today. This is what I need help with. 3 questions, 15 minutes, the whole team. That's it. Scrum, it's fast, it's dirty, and at the end, everyone has the right answers and knows what they're doing for that day. So collaboration. The developers are working together. The Scrum Master has an eye on it. And if anything goes wrong or something may not meet the time box, you can push it up to the product owner, and the product owner has the responsibility of organizing and spreading things out.
I love the idea of a time and it being very quick. I actually saw it was a tweet today from Product Hunt, and someone had done research with MRI scans and figured out the amount of frustration levels of the brain from back-to-back Zoom meetings. So the more Zoom meetings you have, the more intensity that plays in your brain, the more fatigue, the more frustration, and the more exhaustion that happens. And then breaks can refresh that, but it just keeps happening. And oftentimes you get stuck in these meetings that nothing gets accomplished, but they waste an hour of your time or 2 hours of your time. And if you're trying to make something, to produce something, you can't be in endless meetings.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that reminds me of a really funny story. I'll be short, I promise. Probably. So I was a young hot shot in process improvement, and I had just got like my Lean Six Sigma black belt, and I thought I was on top of the world and had all the right answers. And I worked for a very large Fortune 500 company at the time in a very important division. And I reported to our senior vice president of this division. And I thought it was really cool because I reported to the big boss. But I was privy to a lot of meetings. And at first I thought it was really cool. Look at me, young guy, being involved in all these fancy, highbrow meetings. But then I got to thinking while I was sitting through these meetings, because I'm a process guy and my job is to save money, how much money do these meetings cost? So, clever me, I had weird access and got everyone's at least average salary, including my senior vice president boss, their average salaries. And I put them all into a spreadsheet, and I created a quick little, calculation where I could type in who was in the meeting with me and how long the meeting was, and it would spit out how much that meeting cost. I thought I had just figured out the coolest thing ever that would change the face of business. One day I presented it to my boss in a meeting. It was him, senior vice president, 3 other VPs, a bunch of directors, me, and I typed in everyone while I was being quiet in a corner, and it popped out a ridiculous number. It's like an hour-long meeting, but because of the heavy hitters that were in this meeting, the cost was crazy. So finally it came to me to talk, and they're like, oh, what ideas? What are you looking on? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, actually, I created this cool little Excel spreadsheet that tells us the value of meetings. And they look at me where it's like, well, not so much the value, but the cost of meetings. And how much time and fake money it would save by not having so many meetings. And I presented my results, and my boss gave me the weirdest look, and it was kind of like we'll cover this later. And I had a meeting with him later. He's like, I don't ever want to see that again. I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I thought that was groundbreaking information. He's like, we know. We're still going to have meetings. He's like, I don't care how much it costs. They're here for the day, right? They're here for the hour. They might as well be in this meeting solving problems. I was like, oh, okay. So I didn't delete that spreadsheet. In fact, I still have it. I saved it because it cracked me up, and it was a lesson learned in hubris. But man, I thought I just solved the business world's problems that day by proving that meetings are costly and crazy, but it never went anywhere. Long story short, a couple months later, I was no longer reporting directly to the SVP.
Yeah. It's definitely learn who your customer is, going back to that.
Ooh, good one.
They didn't need that. And then the other part to go, you're thinking inwardly of all these cool things and you want to kind of show value. But if you had thought outwardly and really discovered their needs and challenges, you would have probably realized, as was explained to you, this isn't really a problem. We understand that.
Yeah.
We've come to terms with that.
Yeah, it was a learning lesson. Yeah, I've made some painful mistakes in my career. But anyways, so the last three main Scrum principles: value-based prioritization, the role of the product owner. Their job is to take those backlog items and prioritize them. They have the final say in what goes in a sprint and what is worked on. It's based off of value. What is going to provide the biggest bang for the buck for the customer? I keep using that login button example because someone has to code a login button. We take it for granted if you're not a developer, but someone made that and wrote the code of where it takes you next and what it does and blah, 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 blah. At some point, that is the highest value item on the list of things to do. And the product owner prioritizes, says, this is value based. This is the most value we can bring to the customer right now, so we're going to work on this. Instead of working on the color scheme of the header on the contact us page. Is that super valuable? Probably not. Does it need to get done? Yes. But it's probably not near the top of priority. So why would you work on that first? Instead, knock out real value. And what that does with those iterations, every iteration you finish, every sprint you finish, because it's prioritized with value, the product starts taking shape really fast. And the stakeholders, those senior people in the company, start seeing this come together, and they see the value the Scrum team's bringing, the developers, the Scrum Master, the product owner. They can see that, oh, this is working. Look, we already have a website, and it's not completely functional and it's missing a lot of pieces, but they've already built this. That's awesome. Instead of, hey, we spent a month and we figured out what color we want the header to be. That's not valuable, right? So value-based prioritization, and that's translatable into the business world and entrepreneurship, and the same thing. When you're starting a business, the list of things to do is monstrous, scary, intimidating. In fact, it's one of the main reasons people don't ever launch what they think they want to build as an entrepreneur and go back to falling back to their normal job. Because they finally sit down and they make that list of everything I need to do to launch this business, and it's huge. It's overwhelming. But value-based prioritization, what is really important? What's the bang for the buck? What can deliver something that is of value to my customer as fast as possible? And I really liked, I took that away as a really good introspective thought about making a business and prioritizing what's valuable.
Yeah, I really love that, because you need those immediate rewards. Otherwise, you won't stick with something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So last two, second to last is time boxing. I already kind of hit on it. Time boxing is super important, as we said already, because if you give people the leeway to take as long as they want to solve a problem, they will never produce anything. We could iterate and change things and make things perfect forever. And at the end of the day, the customer's not looking for perfect. They're looking for functionality. They're looking for it to work.
That's Parkinson's law, isn't it? Whatever task is.
Yes, I was wondering if you were going to hit that on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so Parkinson's law is however long a task it has given to it is how long the task will take ultimately. So if I'm given till the end of the day to take out the trash, it's probably going to be the end of the day that I'm going to take out the trash. If I'm given 2 weeks to make a painting or something like that, to do a painting, it's going to take me 2 weeks compared to if I would just give myself 3 days. And there is unrealistic expectations, and that's where, proper planning and understanding is. But most of the time, we're pretty industrious and we're able to get things done a lot quicker.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the basis of some of the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, I can't recall at the time, so please forgive me for being wrong on this. They were kind of the first major country to experiment with shorter work weeks. I think it was like 30 hours they were looking at originally, going from a 40-hour work week to a 30-hour work week. In America, we're business all the time, nonstop. A lot of top business heads in America said, that would never work. That's crazy. How could you get productive? How could you produce with, reduced time? Well, what they found is they're producing exactly the same amount in less time. Exactly what you said. Parkinson's law. Hey, you have 30 hours to complete this task instead of 40. Got it. I'll get it done. Because let's be honest. Everyone, you work an 8-hour day. You work 9 hours. 1 hour of that could be lunch and some breaks. So 8 hours of work. How much of that work is not actually work? Or how long are you spreading it out? Or multitasking so you're not actually working on the specific thing? Long story short, focus and knowing what your end goal is means reducing the time. You can still produce the exact same product.
I think I read a while back or something, the average American white-collar worker only actually does about 2 to 3 hours of work a day of actual work, whatever their tasks are, between, meetings, going from, just walking about, water cooler stuff, trying to resettle and focus. And maybe it was in the book, like Deep Work or A World Without Email, one of the Cal Newport books that talks specifically around focusing and things, how much time it takes for you to really settle in. And if you get a text message or a ping or something, it breaks you out of that. And it takes about 15 minutes to get your focus back in. And now we're in a world, of course, with Teams and our phones and all these other things, email. And so you're in constant interruption. So you're really not as productive as you think you are if you're really tracking yourself. Exactly.
So the last core piece of Scrum, and once again, I've already kind of talked about it, is iterative development. You get those quick wins. Not only is it good for you and your self-esteem, it's like, oh, look, I can see what I'm building and it's coming together. But the stakeholders see the value. Your product owner sees the value. And what that does versus formal project management is it encourages the stakeholders and the people who give you the finances to keep doing this thing, or the leeway to keep doing this project. It gives them the encouragement that you're doing the right thing and to keep going and to keep giving you the resources and the time you need. In an entrepreneurship type world, iterative development is good for your mental health, I think. As in, once again, we talked about you write out the list of everything you need to do to start a business and suddenly you're overwhelmed. Holy cow, where do I get started? How do I do all of that? Prioritize, find what's important to you, what's going to get you closer to done. Work on that tiny piece, move it aside and work on the next piece. You do that a couple times and suddenly you have a solid done column of work, and you can start seeing the effort you're putting in and how it's building towards your goal.
Yeah, I think in a prior episode we talked about enjoying the journey, not the destination. You know, enjoying the steps, and this way it really keeps you focused on the present, keeps you focused on what's important, keeps you moving forward. So I really love all those concepts and things that you talked about. It seems like a really neat concept to really dive into more. You know, I'm going to go read some more in on this.
Yeah.
I learned some new nuggets. I knew some about Scrum, but I didn't necessarily understand all the pieces to it. So that's great. And I really love that there's so much utility, not just in the software world, but for everyone's business or everyone's operations. If you're within a business, just being able to focus and serve people better seems pretty fantastic.
Yeah. And I think in the corporate world, it kind of gets pigeonholed into software development, which is why I kept bugging my instructor about other opportunities to utilize this, because this is a framework. This is not a methodology. It's a framework. And they wanted to push that concept very strongly to me. And what that meant was there's leeway. It's agile. It's meant to be flexible because opportunities change, time requirements change, resources change. Maybe you have an expensive bill and suddenly you have to dip into your savings. You don't have quite as much money that you had originally planned for that business you're preparing for. You have to be able to adjust and move with what comes at you in life. And that's why it's a framework. It's not a methodology. You don't have to follow it step by step by step. But if you utilize all the pieces together, it produces something of value every single time-boxed event.
Fantastic. Well, I love that. We're a little over 40 minutes in, so let's hit the story of the week or whatever you found recently to share about an opportunity in a often overlooked place.
Tanner, that was it. I apologize. Sorry. Well,
you didn't find the story?
I'm going to mark this clip because, I texted you about that. I was looking for stories and really just kind of turned into Scrum for entrepreneurship.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's not a problem at all. Yeah, so if anything, we really have filled our episode, to be honest with you.
That's what I'm saying, and we can cut all this nonsense, but there's no need to make this 60 minutes if we don't have that, and let's not force it, make it weird.
No, I believe just keep this all in because people need to see how the sausage is made, which is me apparently not reading my text messages.
Whoops.
Or if I do, usually most stuff goes in my head. I remember it for a certain amount of time, and then it just leaves me 30 minutes later. So
that's fair.
But no,
I did search for several, but my mind is so full of Scrum right now that I found myself searching for Scrum articles. And more importantly, what I wanted to see out of it, which was Scrum and something other than software development. And we just beat that to death already. No,
that's great. So, yeah, I think we can cut the episode here. We really appreciate everyone who actually made it this far. Let us know if you did. And if you like how we don't always pay attention to each other outside of the podcast. So, again, we really appreciate everyone who's listened to the podcast so far. The amount of downloads and response we've gotten has just been way better than I can imagine, but I'm really not in it. And I know you're not in it for the accolades or anything like that. I actually saw a really neat YouTube video of Ali Abdal. He was like a doctor who became a YouTuber and now he's got this like YouTube empire, but he made a comment. He's like, every time I was focusing on the metrics or what would be hot or what would perform well, I would just get burned out from it. But if I could create a video or a piece of content focused on making one person who read it would get some use out of it or connect with them, I would enjoy doing it. And I feel like we're doing that. We're trying to make content not only we would want to listen to, but we would want to share with others and make their lives better. So
absolutely.
I'm loving it. And missing yesterday made me feel like I missed brushing my teeth, missed the gym, missed something. I felt like something was wrong. I didn't want to go to bed because it was like my routine was disrupted. That's how much I enjoy doing these podcasts with you. And
I agree. It's become a blast. And really to be that obtuse and circle back to your final Scrum learning lesson for today, the final piece of a sprint is called a sprint retrospective, where the product owners and the developers and the Scrum Master get together and decide what went well and what didn't go well. And they iterate. It's continuous improvement. What can we do better next? So we talk about this awkward conversation we just had about like, ooh, but I didn't have an extra article for you this week. You know, we've got things to do. We're building on this. We're on episode 4? But exactly as you said, at the end of the day, we just want to provide value. If one person's like, wow, I'm inspired, let's go look up Scrum, mission accomplished today. So thank you, everyone, for listening to us. Thank you, Tanner, for listening to me ramble about my training. And I'm excited for next week as well.
All right, let's call it there. Everyone have a good night.
Bye.